6 years ago, I almost got deported. It was a couple of days before my 21st birthday when my dad told me 4 words I'll never forget. You don't have papers. In his hand was a letter from the Department of Homeland Security. It was a notice to appear in immigration court, which is basically the first step in the deportation process. The letter said that I had overstayed my visa and was now subject to eviction, or a 10-year bar from re-entering the only place I've ever considered home. What do you do when you learn that you are less than legal? See, like many of you, I had heard sound bites of the illegal alien experience, how they're criminal, they take our jobs, they don't even speak English. But my dad's words unraveled a reality that wasn't mine until suddenly it was. Because suddenly that illegal alien was me. Today, I want to share that experience and how through that moment I learned that our thoughts have real consequences, and choosing your words is the smallest thing you can do for the biggest change in your life. So in 1996, a big recession hit Canada. My mom was a bank teller, and she lost her job. My dad was a realtor. He had plenty of houses to sell, but no one to buy. So we left in search of the American dream. We came legally, thought we would get permanent residency, and eventually transition to citizenship. But one time, our immigration attorney filed the paperwork late. Another time, the employer sponsoring us sold his business. And so because there's a change in ownership, we had to restart the entire application process. We played by the rules, but things went wrong. And so more than 20 years later, we find ourselves undocumented. Now, for some of you, 20 years is just a generation. But for me, 20 years is a lifetime. And what's pretty extraordinary is that 20 years of living in the shadows is actually pretty ordinary. There's roughly 12 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. Most have lived here for at least 13 years. And you also have to understand that growing up paperless was not easy. I took out 6 figures in student loans to pay for college because I didn't qualify for federal financial aid. My parents also wouldn't let me study abroad because what they knew at the time, and what I didn't, was that if I left the country, I wouldn't be allowed back in. When you're undocumented, you can't get a driver's license, can't open a bank account, you can't even get a credit card. We never imagined that living in fear is the price we'd pay for the American dream. And we try to stay positive, but it's hard to keep your head down and your chin up at the same time. You know, as taxpayers, we all spend a lot of money and a lot of time breaking up families and jailing people who just want to work. Every night, 34,000 immigrants sleep in prisons across the country just because they lack a proper visa. The truth is that we remove thousands of hardworking people from society at no benefit to anybody but the private prisons that are paid to detain them. As a community, we need to change the way that we think about immigrants, because the way that we think about immigrants impacts the way that we talk about them. The way that we talk about them impacts the way that we treat them. And the way that we have treated immigrants has led us to a point where 12 million people are living in the shadows. You know, choosing your words is truly the smallest thing you can do for the biggest change in your life, because real change is only possible through understanding, and all it takes is a tiny bit of perspective. A couple of years ago, I was at a panel on immigration reform, and one of the questions that came up was, what do we do about the 12 million people who are living in the shadows? A senator responded, and he said, you know, I wish those immigrants would just go to the back of the line. And so when the floor opened up for a Q&A, I took the mic, and I said, Senator, What does the line look like? He didn't have an answer for me, because the truth is, there is no line. It has to do with how old you were when you got here, what country you came from, the visa you came in on, and a whole host of other factors. But for people like me who were brought here as children, there is no line. And that's why immigration reform matters to so many people, because it gives us a chance to get in line. Look, real, sustainable change really begins from a place of honesty. And the honest truth is, what separates my family from many of yours is simply the passage of time and the lottery of birth. Recently, I was at the National Archives looking at an immigration exhibit when a woman walked by with her husband, and she said to him, "That's the problem with immigrants these days. They just don't assimilate anymore." And in that moment, I had no words, because I realized that as an immigrant, she was talking about me. I also knew, though, that if I didn't challenge her assumption, I was letting it live and I was giving it life. So I approached her. I said, "Excuse me, ma'am. I think immigrants do try hard to assimilate. I'm an immigrant, and you wouldn't know it if I didn't tell you." And she said, "Well, you know, my grandpa is actually a German immigrant, but we have a lot of family in the military, so we're just very patriotic." And I told her, as you should be. There's thousands of immigrants who serve in our military. And do you know how we thank them for their service? We deport them. Her eyes opened wide, and in that moment of realization, she leaned down to give me a hug. Because the truth is that real change is only possible through understanding. If you can get someone to think differently, you can get them to speak differently and act differently. You know, someday each of you will run into your own version of the lady at the National Archives, and when you do, I hope you find the courage to stand tall and challenge her assumptions. Most of us are here today because somebody in our lineage took a giant leap of faith to come to America. And so I'm asking you to fight for immigrants' rights as if your future depended on it, because in another time, it would have. At the end of the day, building better communities boils down to this. If you can just change your words, you can change the world. Thank you.